Hi, welcome to Read It Bomb, Read It, the Book of Mormon. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I am here with the cast again. We have Sam from Through the Mist. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Good. And we also have Daniel, my lifetime long friend.
Yeah, good to
Yeah.
be here. It's always fun.
Good. Thanks for being here, y'all. It's always, like you said, it's always fun. It's always better to have all three of us on here instead of just me talking. So today we are actually going to be going over some interesting things that I found that actually corrects God logic. So we're going to be talking about, again, a little bit, showing a brief clip of it, the interaction I had with God logic on the Gospel Truth channel, where I was trying to, bring up something that I think is a contradiction with the incarnation. And he flat out told me that's not what divine simplicity is when I was explaining it. So we're going to play that, and then we're going to show from St. Augustine, we're going to show from St. Thomas Aquinas that what I said exactly is what the divine simplicity means, or what I said is directly related to divine simplicity. And then we're going to show how that relates to the incarnation. And then we're also going to, again, interact with Testify Apologetics. He released a video on the incarnation, and we're going to be responding to that and making some interesting comments, and we're going to be bringing up this aspect of divine simplicity. He apparently in his video said, hey, look, there is no contradiction, and then he did not mention divine simplicity. And that's a thing that a lot of people who talk about the incarnation, they don't mention. They talk about the incarnation, but they leave out of the picture the idea of divine simplicity. Because when you put those two things together, the wheels start rolling in people's heads. Like, how does this work? If God's divinely simple, but now you're throwing into the mix a human nature, and how does that go together? And so we'll get into that. But let's go ahead real quick, and we're going to jump over to. Let me see here. This interaction. Let's share the screen. Let's see. It's not popping up. Oh, I got to add it to the stage here. There we go. Can y'all see that now? Okay. I'm going to start playing it. Let me know if you can't hear it. We should be able to, but let's really come to fruition.
What is the hypostatic union?
So the hypostatic union is this idea that somehow Christ, in who he is, has two natures. He has the divine nature, which is simple, right? Is impassible, can't change, is outside of time, matter, and then he has a human nature, right? Which also constitutes of a human mind, will, soul, and body, right? And so anything he does in earth, in time, apparently in creation, is only the human will that is acting. So who died on the cross? Well, it's the human nature.
Well, you would agree that there's a difference between nature and personhood, right?
Well, see, but when you get to divine simplicity, that's the issue, right? God is what he has. So God the Father is his nature. God the Son is his nature.
No, he's not. Would you? It sounds like you don't see a distinction between.
Okay, so he said no, he's not, right? So let's kind of count these up, because we're gonna debunk these different aspects of what he's saying here. So I just said, hey, well, this is the whole issue. This is the whole debate that I'm trying to have with him. That in divine simplicity, God is his nature. The person is the nature. He said no, he's not. Okay, so that's one. Let's go on.
Nature and personhood. So would you say that a rock has a nature?
Well, so you take a rock, but then a rock's not divinely simple, right? So if you take God who can't have parts,
Mr. Swanson,
I'm bringing it back around, right? You take a rock's not divinely simple, right? So maybe I should define this a little bit better, real quick. Okay, divine simplicity means that God cannot have any literal physical parts or any metaphysical parts, and that last part's really important, right? You can't say, and a lot of people say that God can't even have Cambridge changes, right? So a Cambridge change is there's somebody who's a man and he's married, right? And his wife dies. The man has not changed, but the man is now a widow, right? The concept around the man has changed due to his relation to his wife, right? And so there's some people who say, due to divine simplicity, God can't even have those kinds of changes where he doesn't change, but things outside of him change the metaphysical makeup of who he is, right? So divine simplicity is really strict for a lot of people. And you can't, God can't have any kind of parts, either metaphysical or material, right? And so talking about a rock, well, a rock can have metaphysical parts, right? It can have the form, and it can have other things, but this is a created understanding. God's not created in their mind. So I just wanted to kind of define that. Do you have any questions about that?
No. That's pretty straightforward. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So let's hear more, and then we'll get into Augustine and Aquinas. Let me pull this back up.
Just simply talking about the distinction between nature and personhood. Would you say that rock has nature, it has existence as a being?
Sure.
Okay. Would you say that a rock is a person?
No.
Right. So there is a clear distinction between what a rock is, what nature is, and what personhood is. So when you're talking about the hypostatic union and the actions of the person who possesses both natures, it's very vital that we understand that nature and personhood are two different things. Natures don't do anything. Persons do. Persons act. Natures don't. So since the person of the Son possesses two natures, it is no problem saying that God died for us on the cross pertaining to his human nature, right? So death is a property of the human nature, not the divine nature. So Jesus, who is God, can experience death pertaining to his human nature, a separation of soul and body.
Okay, can I push back on that?
Of course.
Okay, so with the idea of divine simplicity, there's no parts in God whatsoever, right? So God just is his nature, right? And so if you say, well, personhood and nature are different, then you're saying God has two parts now. He has this person part and he has a nature part. But that goes against that destroys simplicity, which destroys God's perfection, which would destroy God kind of in like
simplicity. It doesn't destroy simplicity because you're misunderstanding what that is. So when okay, so we'll leave it there, right? We don't need to watch the whole thing, but I wanted to have him say that you're misunderstanding simplicity. This isn't simplicity, and God is not his nature, right? What God has, he isn't that, right? So we're going to get into all those things here in a minute. And again, this is God logic, right? So let's jump here. Okay, can y'all see this?
Yep.
You know what?
Summa Theologica.
Let's actually start before him because Aquinas came after. That's the Summa Theologica. Let's start here, though. So this is on the Trinity, or De Trinitate. I think that's how you say it in Latin.
Augustine.
This is from Augustine, right? Augustine, yes. Is there a certain way to say it?
I've heard it
Augustine,
said both ways. Augustine is fine.
Augustine has more aura.
Yeah.
Saint Augustine.
So right here, on the Trinity, right here, book, what is that, 7? And then right here, this is what we're going to be talking about right here, okay? So we're not going to read too much of this. This is the main quote right here. It's book 7 of On the Trinity. You can go watch it or go read it yourselves. It's in the link in the description. But right here, okay. But neither is the word person commonly so used in any case, nor in this Trinity. When we speak of the person of the Father, do we mean anything else than the substance of the Father? Okay. Wherefore, as the substance of the Father is the Father himself, not as he is the Father, but as he is, so also the person of the Father is not anything else than the Father himself. Okay. So when you're talking about the Father, the person of the Father, we mean nothing else than the substance of the Father. Okay. So this is on the Trinity. This is Augustine. just saying flat out right, when you're talking about the person of the Father, you're talking about the essence. Okay. And the thing
That
is,
could be
the
construed as
essence
your
and
nature
nature,
as well.
yes, right. And again, it's because of simplicity. You can't split these things up, right? And anyone will basically say that that essence and nature are basically the same thing, right? But when you're talking about the person, you're talking about the substance, as it said here. So that is, when is this? When is Augustine? Does he give me a time frame? It doesn't, right? So I forgot when he was. I think he was in the 5th century, I believe, or 4th century. No, he might have been, 4th century. But yeah, so that's pretty early on. And he's saying, look, the Father is the substance, right? The person of the Father is the substance. So that kind of proves my point there, right? Now we're going to go to this next one.
And is he the earliest person?
Okay.
Is he
And
one
this
of the
is
first to push this
question
idea?
3. No, he's probably not. I mean, so Augustine, I think, is just kind of going off of earlier ideas that he had or given to him, right? Or that other people were talking about. So I don't know who would be the first one. I'm just trying to show as many different voices saying the same thing as I can, right? And right now, I'm just mainly just showing these two. But right, so we have Augustine, who's already said it, and right here we're in the Summa Theologica, and this is question 3, the simplicity of God. We're going to go down here to Article 3 in this question, and we're just going to kind of start reading. Okay, so it says, on whether God is the same as his essence or nature. Okay. Objection 1. So basically, the Summa Theologica, for those who don't know, it's Thomas Aquinas. He's basically trying to prove things, and so he sets up objections, and then he destroys those objections in his mind, right? So let's see the objections he sets up in this article and then destroys, right? Because the objections are kind of showing what he believes people would say and what he doesn't agree with. Okay, so objection 1. It seems that God is not the same as his essence or nature. Okay, for nothing can be in itself, but the substance or nature of God, i.e., the Godhead, is said to be in God. Therefore, it seems that God is not the same as his essence or nature. Okay, we're going to skip these two, and we're just going to jump down to what he says, right? So, on the contrary, right? Let's see who he quotes. Well, no, it's not this one, but it's another one. Okay. On the contrary, it is said of God that he is life itself, and not only that he is a living thing. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Now, the relation between Godhead and God is the same as the relation between life and a living thing. Therefore, God is his very Godhead. Okay, so this is very important. God is his very Godhead. Again, so it's kind of getting down to what God has is, right? God here is supposed to be the person of the Father, right? Or in this case, they're all God, right? So any person in God is the very Godhead. Okay, do you have any questions? Okay, let's see. And then this is his answer, right? This is very important. I answer that God is the same as his essence or nature. Pretty clear. Okay, this is exactly what I told God Logic. Okay, God is the same as his essence or nature. To understand this, it must be noted that things composed of matter and form, the nature or essence must differ from the suppositum. Okay, and so suppositum here is more or less related to person, right? He uses this word throughout. I'm pretty sure he usually relates this to kind of like person, right? And we'll see that later. Because the essence or nature connotes only that only what is included in the definition of the species, that is included in the definition of man, for it is by this that man is man, and it is that it is this that humanity signifies, that namely whereby man is man. Okay, so he's giving examples, right? So he's like, in created things, the suppositum, right, is different from the nature, because it says that the essence is like basically what we are, and then it's explaining that the person or the suppositum might have other characteristics added to it that the essence doesn't denote, right? So, for example, I think it's going to distinguish here. It says, now individual matter with all the individualizing accidents is not included in the definition of the species. For this particular flesh, these bones, this blackness, or this whiteness. So, for example, he's explaining here, like, I'm a man, right? And Barack Obama's a man, right? But in the definition of being a man is not denoted as skin color, right? But we're both men, right? So we're different individuals because we have different characteristics, right? But we are both men, right? So we have different accidental qualities that could have been different, distinguishing us, right? Okay. Consequently, humanity and a man are not wholly identical, but humanity is taken to mean the formal part of a man. So humanity is what it means to be a man, right? Because the principles whereby a thing is defined are regarded as the formal constituent in regard to the individualizing matter. On the other hand, in things not composed of matter and form, okay, what is not composed of matter and form? God. That's what he believes. In which individualization is not due to individual matter, that is to say, to this matter, the very forms being individualized of themselves, it is necessary the forms themselves should be subsisting supposita. Therefore, suppositum and nature in them are identified. Since God then is not composed of form and matter, he must be his own Godhead, his own life, and whatever else is thus predicated of him. Okay. So again, it's saying this pretty clearly, right? God, the person, is his essence. He is his nature. And it gives all these reasons why, right? Because he's not made of matter, he's not made of form. Okay, so we have Augustine already saying the Father is the substance, right? The person of the Father is a substance. Here we say we have God is his essence and his nature, right? And this article or this question we're reading is on the simplicity of God. Okay, so let's come down here real quick. I think there's some things that are interesting. We can speak of simple things only, and this is very important for later on, we can speak of simple things only as though they were like the composite things from which we derive our knowledge. Therefore, in speaking of God, we use concrete nouns to signify his substance or subsistence, because with us only those things subsist which are composite, and we use abstract nouns to signify his simplicity. In saying, therefore, that Godhead or life or the like are in God, we indicate the composite way in which our intellect understands, but not that there's any composition in God. Okay, this is really important right here because he's saying we can only understand God through making his simplicity like composite, but it's not actually that way. And the thing is, he's going to actually use this later on to defend this idea that we can separate person from nature, right? So this is a weird thing. Aquinas basically contradicts himself. Right here, he says, no, they are identical because of simplicity. We're talking about simplicity right here. God is his essence. But because we can think about him and speak of him as composite, because our minds are too small, right, to think of him in simplicity, then that's only in our heads. That's not in him. He says that right here. But later, he's going to say, but because we can do that, we can actually distinguish between these things, which destroys simplicity. It doesn't really make sense. Okay. You have any questions about that?
No, it's funny because Aquinas essentially he frames his own paradigm, and like you said, he kind of contradicts it, but he doesn't. He almost makes this idea that he doesn't contradict himself because he's just using the terms that we would know and the framework that we would know with our simplistic understanding in order to circumvent the contradictions within his, like, both his logic and his argument on defining these things.
Yeah, and I mean, as we go on, we can just talk about this right now. It seems like, I want people to look for this. It seems like either Aquinas, I'm not like, obviously he sees this. I feel like he sees this issue, right? And it seems like he's just like saying, you know what? I'm going to take this and just act like it's not an issue. To me, it seems like because this comes from tradition, right? This is a deposit of faith from the apostles. Supposedly, this has been handed down by the magisterium because he's Catholic. You know, the creeds rely on divine simplicity. So it sounds like he's just like, yeah, in God, there's no composition, but in our minds, like we kind of have to force it that way. And then he's going to use that kind of weird paradox to defend things later on that can't be defended with simplicity.
So it
So I
is
guess, and
required to believe, if you're a creedal Christian, like you have to subscribe to divine simplicity, like no matter what.
so in
That's
in
my question.
Catholicism,
Or
you
in
can't-
general, any group, like any, I guess I wouldn't say any group, but like a group that would still be considered like, well, how do I phrase this? Because lots of groups will look at different groups differently, but let's just say like a creedal Christian in general. Like, do any of them reject divine simplicity? And if they were, would the consensus of like creedal Christians reject them as being Christian and basically say they're outright heretical, or like what? How I guess how core is this doctrine?
So this is basically baked into the cake, right? So Catholicism itself, I'm pretty sure, has from the magisterium stated that to be Catholic, you cannot reach divine simplicity, right?
Okay.
Or you must assent to it, right? But a lot of Catholics say, well, but it doesn't exactly explain it in depth. So then I can assent to different ways of it, different understandings of it, right? Because in Catholicism there are people who are Thomists, right? They follow Thomas Aquinas and they think he's like the goat, and he's all hail his intellect, right? And that's good for them. It's just I wanted to point this out where it seems like he's contradicting himself here, and we'll get into it in a second. But yeah, and I would say Orthodox, right? Orthodox Christians, big O Orthodox, they also have to ascribe to divine simplicity because again, it's baked into the cake, right? All the creeds assume the divine simplicity. That's how they define God, because again, they got this from Greek philosophy, which was defining it this way itself, right? Even before Christianity absorbed that idea.
And then, real quick, how much longer after that's established is the idea of the hypostatic union created? Is it around the same time? Is it before or is it after?
No, so that's a good point. So once, basically once Nicaea happens and they said, hey, God the Father and Jesus Christ are homoousios, right? They're of the same substance. And when you say God is a simple being, and then you say, Jesus Christ, he's also that same simple being, then there has to be a way to explain how can the simple being now be composite on earth without God changing. And the whole issue is in Greek metaphysics, right? In Greek philosophy, you had to have a simple thing that was the start and the reason for everything else, right? Because the simple thing was perfect. And so it's called perfect God theology. So Christianity basically absorbed that. And that's where we would say the apostasy really started in that absorption. And so in that absorption of perfect God theology, any change in God would destroy God and would mean you can't explain reality, right? And so that's kind of what they're holding to. So basically, how do you say Jesus is that and can, be born and be a man and, change? So that's the issue. And that comes up in, I think, about within the next 100 years. They're talking, that's when the Chalcedonian Creed is formalized, right? Because all these people are trying to answer the question.
That idea actually was formulated in the Chalcedonian Creed, the hypostatic union. So, and the reason being is because you had guys like Nestorianism, which was like Christ being divided into two persons. And so like this formulation was actually established in order to kind of counter that position. So was the idea around prior to that? I would say probably, but I would say it was formalized, at least from my research, probably around like mid 5th century or, 450, whatever AD. So
yeah, but the issue with the creeds are, hey, we're fighting about this for long enough, we got to define it. You know what I mean? So there had to be people on different sides of it before.
Right.
And so, yeah, the whole thing is, if you watch Ryan Mullins, he actually talks about how the Chalcedonian Creed doesn't actually solve Nestorianism. He just believes like it keeps it going, right? He says like, because you have divine simplicity, like it causes this issue. And again, that's what I'm saying, right? So you have another theologian who is highly trained, and he rejects divine simplicity because he says it's not biblical, which is what we would say. And then he says it actually harms things like the incarnation, which is what we're saying right now as well. But okay, let's go back to this and make sure.
Sorry for knocking you off track a little bit, Swen.
So this is
I just wanted to know the
question now
background
39. No, there's good questions. Yeah, no, there's great questions. Anytime you want to join in, do that. Okay, so this is question 39, the persons in relation to the essence. Okay, so we've already put forth, right, that Augustine says the person of the Father is the substance, right? We have Aquinas already saying, hey, due to simplicity, right, God is his essence and nature, right? So this is just another take on that, whether God is the essence, whether in God the essence and is the same as the person. Okay. And so again, we're going to look at the objections, because the objections are kind of showing what Aquinas wants to correct. What he's saying, no, we can't believe this. It's very important. Okay. So objection 1, it would seem that it would seem that in God, the essence is not the same as the person. For whenever essence is the same as person or suppositum, again, that's the word that pops up, there can only be one suppositum of one nature, as is clear in the case of all separate substances. For in those things which are really one and the same, one cannot be multiplied apart from the other. So what he's saying here is, if the Trinity is true, right, this is what the objection is saying. You have one substance, you have one essence that is God, and they're saying there's 3 people. And the objection is, well, you can't actually have that. If you're saying that the person and the essence are the same thing due to simplicity, then if you multiply the persons, you have to multiply the essence, right? But that's how you get tritheism, right? So they're saying no, like then you can't say the person is the essence. And then when we get down to what Aquinas answers, you're going to find it pretty interesting. Okay, so it says, for those things which are really one and the same, you cannot be multiplied apart from the other. But, and again, we'll come back to this in a second. But in God, there is one essence and 3 persons, as is clear from what is above expounded. Therefore, essence is not the same as person. Okay, notice that these two are most likely going to go back to simplicity, where it says that, oh, never mind, sorry. It says there's one essence and 3 persons. Never mind, okay. Therefore, essence is not the same as person. That's what the objection is. And then it says, further, nothing can be subject to itself, but person is subject to essence, whence it is called suppositum or hypostasis. Therefore, person is not the same as essence. Okay, right here, he quotes Augustine, what I just quoted. On the contrary, Augustine says in De Trinitate, Volume 7, when we say the person of the Father, we mean nothing else but the substance of the Father. And Aquinas says, I answer that the truth of this question is quite clear if we consider the divine simplicity. For it was shown above that the divine simplicity requires that in God, essence is the same as suppositum, which in intellectual substances is nothing else than person. Okay, I don't know how much more clear you can get.
Bring the receipts.
Right, so
Bring the
it's a lot of
receipts.
reading. Bring the receipts, right? I know it's a lot of reading, but I'm trying to just straight up like, hey, God logic, don't tell me I'm wrong in front of 5,000 people who've now watched this video. And you're saying that in order to protect the incarnation, right? I would, here's the receipts, right? You have Augustine, you have Aquinas saying, hey, due to some divine simplicity, the person and the essence, the person and nature are one and the same. Okay. So you can't come at me and say, but look at a rock. You know what I mean? And then try to like say that, if you take a rock, I called him out on it. I was like, okay, but a rock's not divinely simple, right? A rock can have metaphysical parts, right? You can't say that.
That's a great point.
About God.
Yeah,
that's actually a great point, Swenson.
You should have asked him for an example that would apply to divine simplicity.
But again, that's
that would have been.
He told me I was misunderstanding divine simplicity.
I know. I just like how he used like a concept that's not applied, like you said, a concept that's not applied to divine simplicity, or that you can't apply Divine Simplicity to
right.
to explain his concept.
Yeah, you summed that up perfectly, Swenson. He takes something that is not divinely simple to prove the concept of something being divinely simple. So it's like, yeah, that doesn't actually work at all.
And the funny thing is, we're going to read right here where Augustine does the same thing, right? Again, Augustine just said, hey, our minds can't comprehend what's simple. And so our minds will break down the simple God, right? But that's only in our heads. It's actually not in God. But he's actually going to later require that breakdown in our heads to like help defend the incarnation, right? Again, this is all kind of like intertwined. Okay, so right here, let's go back to this real quick. Okay, so again, the truth of this question is quite clear if we consider the divine simplicity. For it is shown above that the divine simplicity requires that in God, essence is the same as suppositum. Okay, and that is right here, the person, nothing else than the person. But a difficulty seems to arise from the fact that while the divine persons are multiplied, the essence themselves reigns in unity. Let's see here. I'm going to skip down. Thence it follows that in God, essence is not really distinct from person. Okay. Again, he says it again. Let's see.
Now, let's say God logic sees this. Could he just say, well, my understanding is different from what Aquinas is saying? I guess, but then he'd still have to show his point. But I'm like, I don't know. I'm trying to give a little defense for God logic. Like, if God logic sees this, it's like, is there any way that we're misrepresenting his stance by just using Aquinas? And maybe we are. And the question then becomes, it's like, well, what is his understanding in defense of that, right? Because I don't know if he's showed any other examples. In the video that we're looking at,
right? If you take a tree, right?
Yeah, exactly.
What do we do?
No, you're right. I'm just trying to find anything maybe to throw a bone to him. I'm like,
yeah, no, I think that's a fair question. But here's what I think is the issue, like that kind of underlines a lot of these conversations, is where is he getting his definition of divine simplicity from? Like, who is he going to? Who is he appealing to?
Right.
In history to define how he understands these concepts, these metaphysical, really philosophical ideas. And so if it's not Thomas Aquinas, or if it's not Augustine, or if it's not, let's just go all the way back, Philo, if we're going back even further, Plato, right? Or Aristotle. Like, if he's not using these people, then who is he using to define his terms? And so,
is it a mix of a couple different ones, or is it just his own idea? Shout out to our favorite people at Apologia, but I'm like, would James White use Aquinas, or would he have his own version of it? That's what I'm thinking. I'm like, who are they appealing for? Because none of those guys are Catholics, right? God Logic is a mainline Christian, right? He's not a Catholic. So who is his main? Know. Oh, we don't know. He hasn't told us what his faith is specifically.
Well, so I don't know, right? I know that there are some people, like, for example, if you've ever watched Inspiring Philosophy, he does not tell you what he is, right? And I don't know how I feel about that, but he says, look, I'm here to defend Christianity, I'm here to defend Christ, so I don't want to get bogged down in basically my denomination versus your denomination. I can understand that, but at the same time,
he's a Calvinist then.
No. He's definitely either a really nuanced Protestant or like an Orthodox or something like that. You know what I mean? Like he holds to, I think, water baptism.
Get lots of viewership and fans and subscribers to keep it ambiguous, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, he.
Not to say that's not inherently wrong either. For the record, there's nothing wrong with appealing to. Oh, am I there? Hello.
Yeah, it's kind of glitching. Sorry.
But no, I guess that's kind of my whole point. It's hard because I don't know if God Logic actually goes into depth, like where he or why he believes those different ideas. But that's not really a unique problem to just God Logic. To Sam's point, like that's going to be a problem with the majority of like the online kind of Christian space. It's like, where is your appeal for this like understanding of this idea? Like if you're Catholic, it makes it a lot easier. But if you're not Catholic, it kind of makes it hard for me to even say, like, how do I even know I'm representing your point correctly? And it also makes it harder for me to try to, go forward and maybe critique what he's trying to say, because maybe I'm not understanding that point. But again, his only appeal in the video is comparing divine simplicity to something that is not inherently divine or simple, which is just a rock. So
Yeah.
maybe it wasn't the best example, but regardless, you can't actually compare it to anything in a material world. You're still stuck with whatever God is, right? Unless I'm misunderstanding it, but
No,
um,
you're
that's what I'm
saying it
wondering. I'm like,
accurately.
where does God logic build out these ideas? How does he arrive at this conclusion? What sources can we go to see what he's trying to like build a case off of? But because he doesn't do that, what you're doing, I guess, what we're all doing here is totally fair. We're just going to go to where these ideas seem to first spring up, and we'll just go with it from there.
No, yeah. I mean, and maybe not even first bring up, but like most in depth, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
what is it? Aquinas is like what, 1200s, 1300s?
He's definitely like
He's in the
1200.
Middle Ages.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Augustine, again, is like 400, 500s, right? And so you see that even way in the beginning, right? Right, a couple, maybe 100 years after the what am I trying to say? The Nicene Creed, these ideas are already there, divine simplicity, right? So this isn't just a Thomist thing per se. This is, again, I would say baked into the cake. And again, I probably could have looked up and found other early church fathers basically saying the same thing. And again, go watch Ryan Mullins. I've actually quoted him already on the channel in a video before. I played some of his stuff. He is, someone who is a Christian, but he rejects divine simplicity for a number of reasons. I think they're all accurate. So I'd go look him up. But let's look at this real quick. This is what I find interesting. Okay, right here in objection 2, right? Let's see. Right here, objection 2, reply to objection 2. I think this is his cop out, right? So we just saw up here. Let's see. We just saw up here. The truth of this matter is quite clear when it comes to divine simplicity, right? In God, essence is the same as suppositum, which is nothing else than person, okay? And then right here, as essence and person in God differ in our way of thinking, right? It follows that something can be denied of the one and affirmed of the other, and therefore, when we suppose the one, we need not suppose the other. Okay, let's talk about that. What do y'all think about that? I mean, again, this is like right next to each other. He's like, oh, in God, right? He's saying because of divine simplicity, we have. I don't know why he keeps doing that. But so in God, right? Because of divine simplicity, his essence is the same as his person. But because they differ in our way of thinking, we can actually talk about the one and not the other. Like, does that not sound like a cop out? I mean, am I being too hard on him, or what are y'all thinking?
I think you're right. Looks like a cop out. It's not really building off of anything more.
I'm thinking a lot of people in that time period got burned at the stake for heretical views. That's what I'm thinking.
It sounds like bro's afraid he's about to get crucified. So let's just leave it at that.
Well, and so again, going back to Ryan Mullins, I'm basing this comment off him because again, I don't know why it's doing that. It keeps taking this thing off of.
That is a great point, though, Sam. It's like how much of these ideas could actually get fleshed out without fear of getting burned at the stake or executed.
Yeah. Here, let me remove this and bring it back to the stage. Okay, it keeps going out on me. Okay, so if you talk about Ryan Mullins said that when he reads early Aquinas, he thinks Aquinas is trying to like push against divine simplicity, and then basically he was chastised for it, and then he conformed. Right, that's what Ryan Mullins says.
Really?
Right?
So he's straight up.
We're not on stream right now, by the way. Just to let you know.
Oh, we're off?
I mean,
your faces
like
are.
Our faces are, yeah.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, so I was actually gonna show this. So I'll pull you back up. Okay.
That's crazy though.
Yeah,
No, I
so
mean,
that is
I can totally see that, like 100%. And it's interesting because as he's flushing out these ideas, like we don't know, or unless maybe you do. I haven't done a lot of research on this particular bit of writing that Thomas Aquinas put out, but did he do this all in one go, or is this like multiple fragments of his writings that have been compiled together? Because I know it's separated by articles, but I do wonder if it's like, yeah, because I haven't looked into that. So if that's the case, then I do wonder if like later on he's like seeing the contradictions of what he's saying, and he's like, I should probably write this in here, like this little out, to kind of
do you-
rectify this problem in this previous thing I wrote.
yeah,
You know
so
what I
I
mean?
don't know. I don't know about like the history of the Summa Theologica or anything like that, but I do know that that's something that Ryan Mullins has said that in early, I think pre Summa Logica, he was saying things that seemed like he was saying God has properties that aren't the same as his essence, which that is not divine simplicity. And he was corrected on that, and he conformed. And so it seems like now in
Seat's
this,
getting a little
he's
hot
trying
there,
to,
buddy. You better slow down.
yeah. And so
There's nothing.
let me
There's nothing to
uh,
say he would have got burned at the stake at that time period. But like, if you think about what it was at stake, no pun intended, like Thomas Aquinas, all of his writings, like assuming he would have been considered a heretic, likely all of that stuff would have gotten destroyed. So everything that he had written would probably would have gotten burned, destroyed, and
Wouldn't
then he
know
would
it
have been,
even existed.
yeah. Best case scenario, yeah, exactly. Best case scenario, he would have been just a cast out or sent into prison for life. And then worst case, of course, all of his stuff destroyed and then also burned at the stake. So that's pretty.
Dude,
that's pretty.
no, sure.
It's heavy.
Makes
It's
you
heavy.
wonder though, how many people in past history promoted or pushed ideas that were going against it that were just kind of snuffed out that we don't have access to.
No, yeah, for sure. But let's look at this real quick. Okay, so I want to juxtapose himself, right? So right here, we just read this. As essence and person in God differ in our way of thinking, it follows that something can be denied of the one and affirmed of the other, and therefore, when we suppose the one, we need not suppose the other, right? And then this is him that we just read before, right? And it says, we can speak of simple things only as though they were like the composite things from which we derive our knowledge. Therefore, in speaking of God, we use concrete nouns to signify his subsistence, because with us, only those things subsist which are composite, and we use abstract nouns to simplify his simplicity. In saying, therefore, that Godhead or life or the like are in God, we indicate the composite way in which our intellect understands, but not that there is any composition in God.
There it
Okay,
is.
so when you juxtapose these things, he's saying, "Oh, there's no one." Our way of thinking. He just says that, and then he says it follows that something can be denied of the one and affirmed of the other, and therefore we need not suppose the one when we suppose the other. But he literally just said that only works in our brains. That's not actually how it is, right? So it's like a cop out. It's like it's a blatant paradox here, right? And I think I know why he says that, right? So when we jump here to this is the incarnation, right? The mode of the union of the Word incarnate, right? And so right here, these top two questions, right? Did the union of the Word incarnate take place in the nature, right? Well, he says no, it doesn't, right? So again, we come back here. This is the crazy part, right? This is where it gets good. I know we've been reading a lot of stuff, but we come back here, right? And this is on simplicity, okay? And it goes, let's see, it keeps dropping me for some reason right here. Okay. It says right here, whether God is the same as his essence or nature, okay? And then, well, what does it say, right? God is the same as his essence or nature. Just purely says it right there, right? So we have that statement right there. He is the same as his essence or nature. Again, it keeps being weird. There we go. I don't know why it's doing that. Maybe I can close this. Remove from studio. Maybe that will help. Okay. Sorry about that. Asumari. 1 second. I'm going to reopen this thing. Let me pull this up. Sorry about this. Let's see. Stop screen. Share screen. But yeah, so I don't know. Legit, this guy is just saying yes, no, no, yes. And he's making a paradox that like doesn't really make sense whatsoever, right? So God is the same as his essence or nature, okay? And then down here, he says the same thing. The effects of this, let's see. It says right here that they don't have to be the same, but right here they are the same. And then right here, it says, where is it? Only in our way of thinking. Where was that? I totally forgot. Right here. We indicate the composite way in which our intellect understands, but that there is, what is it? But not that there is any composition in God, right? And then right here, it follows that something can be denied of the one in front of the other. Okay, so he's building up to this idea here, right? Which actually this is question 2. So I don't know if this is, this is the third part though of the Summa Theologica. Okay, so I think this comes after the other ones. Let me see. Okay, this is the first part, right? So it looks like he's building up towards the incarnation to where he can like flat out deny that these things are the same, right? But they are the same. So right here, he's in the first one, he says it's not in the nature, right? This is my whole objection, right? My whole objection is says, did the union of the word take place in the nature, right? And he says, no, it doesn't, right? And then he's like, okay, did it take place in the person? And he's trying to say yes. But look at the objection, right? The objection here is it would seem that the union of incarnate word did not take place in the person, for the person of God is not distinct from his nature, as we said, right? And he links back, and when you open this up, right, it takes you right here to what we just read, whether in God the essence is the same as person, right? So he even links to that, right? So the objection is if it doesn't take place in the nature, it can take place in the person, right? And it says, if therefore the union did not take place in the nature, it follows that it did not take place in the person. Okay. We skip down. So it says, and then he tries to give this whole definition, right? He tries to give this whole definition here, and we can read it here in a second. But this is what I really want, right? This is his answer to the objection 1. Although in God, nature and person are not really distinct. So he agrees with me, right? They're not really distinct, yet they have distinct meanings, as we said above, insomuch as person signifies after the manner of something subsisting. And because human nature is united to the word, so that the word subsists in it, and not so that his nature receives therefrom any addition or change, it follows that the union of human nature to the word of God took place in the person and not the nature. Okay. So what do y'all think about that? He just said, even though they're not really distinct, we quoted him before, they're the same thing, right? He quotes Augustine, the person of the Father is the substance, right? He says, well, even though they're not really distinct, they have distinct meanings. So again, he's building on this idea that in our heads, right, we can distinguish these things. And because of that, that's actually somehow a real distinguishing factor in God. But again, doesn't that destroy the whole concept of divine simplicity? You know what I mean? Like, am I seeing this wrong? What do y'all think?
The position is untenable.
Untenable. I like it.
Yeah. The
So
first
I
thing that
just want
came,
to share this one more time.
yeah.
You go.
Well, the first thing that came to my mind whenever you first brought up this problem, and you had slightly mentioned it last time in the last slide that we did. What's interesting, the first thing that came to my mind was, well, Saint Aquinas or Thomas Aquinas, like you said, roughly 1200, right? So Middle Ages. and he's drawing from somebody. And so oftentimes it's noted that he's speaking of or making this he's equating like the Aristotelian God or the God of Aristotle, and he's kind of like making it like Christian like. And so it makes me wonder, because Daniel had brought up earlier, like, hey, well, when was like the hypostatic union established? And I think a lot of these timelines actually need to be kind of ferreted out or like kind of put on screen and looked at, because you'll see like this pattern of ideas kind of tracing back ultimately to the Neoplatism, like the Stoics, like all of these ideas that are shaping their view later on of these early church fathers that lead to Aquinas and his ultimate like Summa Theologica, which is essentially what you're talking about. It's like here's the problem, here's the objection to that problem, or here's the answer or response. And he's basing it off of this already flawed, untenable, as Daniel said, position. He's coming up with all of these responses to something that on its foundation doesn't even need to be addressed, because he's addressing an idea that's not even found in the scriptures. So like, and I think that's like the problem to appealing to like these early church fathers. It's like, you need to understand like who these people were, what they were reading from, who was around them, and that was shaping their understanding. And not just assume that they were like reading the Hebrew Old Testament, because they weren't. Like Thomas Aquinas was reading the Latin Vulgate that was commissioned by Jerome in the 4th century. Okay, well, what did Jerome believe, right? Because that's gonna factor into his Greek manuscript interpretation into Latin that's later being given to, that Thomas Aquinas is using to understand these ideas. So just that interpretation from Greek to Latin, that interpretive lens that's being used is being handed off to these bishops and these other, theologians later on down in history. And so that's factoring into all of this. But I think a lot of Christians are just taking it at face value. Well, with Catholics, it's a little bit different, right? Because they appeal to the magisterium, they appeal to like the saints and all that stuff. But like a Protestant, they're just taking these things whole cloth based off tradition, which you said. And it's just, yeah, I agree with Daniel. It's just, it's an unattainable, unattainable position for sure.
It's just brutal.
So the thing is, I don't even blame Aquinas at this point, because it's been probably, I don't know, 1,000 years that this has been the tradition. So for him, this is baked into the cake, right?
Yeah.
And again, it sounded like he was going against it, and then he got corrected, and he just conformed again, right? If that's actually a true statement. But it doesn't matter if that is or not. This has been going on 1,000 years, right? This idea of, they've already accepted from mixing, Neoplatonism, Middle Platonism with Christianity, that God is defined as this simple, beyond comprehension, unchanging, immaterial thing, right? And so that's baked into the cake. Oh, well, now Jesus is that. Okay, so Jesus and God are the same thing, right? That's, well, how does that work? And then, so he's just trying to systematize, right? It's a systematic theology, how this works. And, I'm not saying he's coming up with this. Again, he's received this from tradition, but it seems like he sees there's an issue here, and he's just trying to make it work, right? Or,
yes,
you know what I mean? It's, I don't know. He really believes that this is a good answer, that, I just said that this is a divine God, and only in our way of thinking can we separate him into, into different components. But because we can do that, he's actually not divinely simple anymore. And you can actually, split him apart. Like, again, that doesn't make sense to me. And this would have to be answered and resolved for me to not believe the incarnation is a contradiction, right? So let's just walk through this real quick before we jump over to Testify's video. Okay. The incarnation says that the person of God the Son, the Word, as it says in John 1, was somehow united to, and we'll see what he says about how it was united, and we'll have some fun with that. But was united to a human nature, or the body, soul, and spirit of the person Jesus, right? So Jesus is the, I guess, incarnate God, or the Word. And my whole objection, my whole contradiction, right? Because the normal Christian apologetic is there is no contradiction. It's only in the human nature that he's human, right? So when you say, okay, well, the divine nature doesn't get tired, okay, so they say, oh, well, he has two natures, so it's only the human nature that gets tired, right? And so that's, we'll see how, in this video, how that's the common apologetic. My whole thing is the person is the divine nature. So if you have change in the person where he goes from having one nature to two natures, and you actually say, well, the person, God the Son, the person, the Word, can actually really interact and communicate and feel the life of Jesus through the human nature, then that is a change in the divine nature because of simplicity, right? I don't accept Thomas Aquinas' paradox of, well, only in our mind is there composite and we can actually use that, but in God not, and actually say that, the divine nature is not changing. I think he's being completely, I don't know, paradoxical. I don't know what other word to say, with that. It's illogical what he's saying, what he's doing.
It's
So
unfortunate.
that's
He
the
probably
issue.
didn't want to have to do that.
And now we're
but
going to
he's
jump
not
over
left the
to
choice.
Yeah, I mean, I really do think that there's something like that going on there because, dude, he's ridiculously smart, right? The whole time he's over there chatting up, all this stuff, and you see he's intellectual, right? He's intelligent, but then it seems like there's some, he's just willing to allow there to be this paradox, and he doesn't even point it out really, right? He kind of points it out, and then he like tries to give an answer to let people just kind of skip over it. But okay. So this is Testify Apologetics response to people saying that the incarnation is a contradiction. Okay, so let's listen to this.
Some people say that the incarnation is a straight up contradiction. How can Jesus?
1 second. I don't know why it keeps doing that. Let's
Huh?
remove this. Let's stop screen share. It's being buggy on me. I don't know why. Okay.
You got to get that Starlink set up, Swenson.
Dude, I guess, but I mean, I've had like connection issues before, and it's not like randomly dropped the thing I'm sharing like it's been doing. Okay.
Some people say that the incarnation is a straight up
Crazy.
fully man. That's like saying a being is omnipotent and tired at the same time. But that's just sloppy thinking. The church doesn't say that Jesus has one nature that's both divine and human. In fact, it's taught for centuries that that's heresy. What it actually says is that the eternal Son, the second person of the Trinity, took on a second nature, a fully human one.
Okay, so let's pause it real quick. So, as it says right there, right, he said, it's not that there's a mixture of the nature or that the divine nature changes. It's that the person of God the Son, right, takes on the human nature. Okay, my whole issue is with divine simplicity. In this whole video, he will not mention divine simplicity. With divine simplicity, that statement of itself is a contradiction because the person of God the Son is the divine nature. Augustine says it. Augustine says the person of the Father is nothing else but the substance, right? And the whole thing is, I didn't go on because he goes on and on. Augustine can ramble, but he goes on and on to use that to safeguard the idea of the Trinity, right? He uses this idea that the person is the substance in order to safeguard the Trinity. And he said, look, this is the same for all of the persons. So he said, if you take the person of God the Father and you add the person of the Son, you didn't add anything, right? If you take the person of the Father and the person of the Spirit and the person of the Son and you subtract the person of the Spirit, you didn't take away anything, right? Because they are fully the divine essence, the divine nature, right? So he's using this idea to safeguard, and this idea is something that these Christian apologists never bring up. So it's like, I don't know if there's a class that was taught on this, but when talking about the incarnation, don't mention divine simplicity, right? So yeah. Okay.
Union. One person, two natures acting through. the second person of the Trinity, took on a second nature of flow. But how can that be? Well, imagine a gamer jacked into a first-person world. The player is still fully himself, sitting on the couch in real life. But in the game world, he moves, talks, takes damage, and even dies through a character. That's a picture of the incarnate.
So this is what he's saying, right? He's saying this is the incarnation, right? He's saying, hey, you know, when it says that Christ was tempted in all likes, right, of man, but he didn't sin. This is the let me make sure I'm sharing this. This is the temptation he's sharing, right? This press X to doubt. He's playing a video game, right? You know what I mean? Like there's all these things in the Bible, and as more of I'm I guess waking up to this concept and this issue, this contradiction. I see in the Bible, the text of the Bible, even if the hypostatic union was real and true, it would not satisfy the text of the Bible, right? It says God actually, you know, Christ actually felt these temptations, and to say, well, it's just in the human nature, the divine person felt nothing, dude, that's crazy. That's lunacy to me, right? To say it's like a video game, just press X to doubt, press A to, you know, stab the guy in the, you know, in the face, like, no, like this, I don't know.
Press A to go to the Garden of Gethsemane.
Exactly, right?
Oh my gosh. It's
You know,
like, oh yeah.
use your computer
do
to
that.
type up the intercessory prayer. You know what I mean? Like input. You know,
Yeah, I mean,
it's
it
just-
doesn't really work. It's like if I'm playing Minecraft, I'm not feeling what the character feels in the game, right? The guy in my character can feel whatever. I don't really care, but in the end, it's just me controlling everything, and I don't even get to feel what's happening in that video game world. Like if the character is taking damage, if it jumps in lava, I'm not feeling myself getting burned alive. I'm fine. So I just kind of I don't know how that works. Maybe I'm misrepresenting his point badly, but it just seems so crazy. Press X to doubt, bro.
it's I don't know, man. I don't know what to think. So let's jump back into it. Let's listen to the rest of it. We can critique it a little bit more.
The Son doesn't stop being divine.
Minecraft Jesus is really cute, though. You can't say it's not. That is really cute.
Creation, acting through a human body and soul like an avatar. When Jesus
Logs into creation like a player, like an avatar.
gets tired, bleeds, or sleeps, that's his human nature doing what human nature does. But behind that experience is the divine person, still sustaining the universe while walking through Galilee. It's not a contradiction, it's an action composite. One agent operating in two radically different realities, not confused, not divided. It's pure metaphysical precision. Some people say that the incarnation is a
Okay, so it's going to repeat. So, okay, what are y'all's thoughts before? Because I responded, I typed up a comment. We can go through that in a second. It's basically explaining what we just went through. But what do y'all think?
I honestly, I don't, at this point, I don't believe that they
It's
they understand why it is they believe what they believe. Like what is the underpinning thing, the notion of God that they have to understand in order for this to be a logical thing to kind of, or a path to go down in your thinking. Like, I don't think a lot of Christians have actually taken that path to see, okay, why can't God be, why does God have to be impassible, immutable, you know, like essentially unchanging, emotionless, without parts, passions? I don't think they take the next logical step to say, where did that even come from? Like, where does that idea even come from? And like, why did they hold this idea? Where are they getting that from? Because I think as LDS, like we read the scriptures and we're like, dude, that Old Testament God is not what you're saying he is here. Right. I don't know. Am I way off base in saying that?
well, no. So again, it's because so you have Justin Martyr who's saying that the word, right, influenced Plato, right? And so the word who is Christ, right? He gave intellect and knowledge to Plato. He revealed things to Plato, right? In order to like prepare the Greeks for Christ. And so when you say stuff like that, it's like, okay, well, you know, then we need to apply that to us, right? Anything that comes from reason or from truth or from wisdom or from the word, we need that, right? And so they're using this, Greek philosophy and reading it back into the text. So that's the issue, right? We read it like you said, and we don't see that because we don't have this worldview that says God is this simple, impassible, immaterial thing, right? Like even there were people back then who didn't have that. For example, Origen, right? He wrote against like people's ideas, and he said that hey, there's some people when it says God is a spirit, they believe he has a body because spirit denote some sort of form for certain people. And he was like, that's, this is crazy. This is dumb. But they weren't taking these, philosophical concepts to heart. They were reading it for what it was. Right. And that's how they understood that. But now when people say, okay, well, God is spirit, they imagine this immaterial thing that is unimaginable. Right. And so it's just baked in the cake. It's been so for, 2,000 years. And they take it for granted, but like you said, they don't see where it came from. And so you're having people now who say timelessness is an issue. So you have open theism, right? You're having people now say impassibility is an issue because like that means God didn't actually suffer for us, right?
Yeah,
And the
and
funny
and
thing
they've all
is,
read the Bible, so they all have this understanding. Like, what are you talking about? He's impassible. Like, he's unchanging. Like, what about all those times in the Old Testament where he like actually shows emotion? He's like repenting of
Mhm.
these things, right? Which that once again that's the problem I'm addressing. I think I'd have to look into this, but I'd be interested to see if the Latin Vulgate changes a lot of the Hebrew words into this notion that's not familiar with the Masoretic text, because they're translating the Latin Vulgate off of the Greek Septuagint, which is a translation from the Hebrew. So the Greek
Mhm.
Septuagint is a 2nd century BC, roughly, well, 3rd to 2nd century BC translation of that time period, what they would have believed theologically of the Hebrew text. And then the Latin Vulgate is taking the Greek Septuagint or whatever they have of that. And Jerome's essentially translating that into Latin with his understandings of these things. So like,
Mhm.
but they're not understanding that these early church fathers, even I wouldn't be surprised if even Augustine, although prior to Jerome, and I think he precedes Jerome in time period, I wouldn't be surprised if he's also reading off the Latin version of the Greek Septuagint. And so, but they don't know that. Like, we have the Masoretic text, and we have like our Old Testament's based off the Masoretic text for the most part, unless you're reading a Greek Septuagint version of that. But so we see our translators now, and when they're coming up with these translations, they're basing it off of that. They're not basing it off of the Greek Septuagint or the Latin Vulgate, right? They're basing their translation differently off of all of this scholarship that Jerome didn't have. And so it's like, and that's where you're starting to see this issue that you're mentioning, is because it's like we're looking at the text and we're like, wait a second, what? And then you jump on Bible Hub and you look at some of these words and you're like, well, how is he coming up with these ideas? Well, okay, church, tradition. Okay, I'll accept it. And it's like, no. If they had the same knowledge if we had the same resources we do now, their opinion of all this stuff would be completely different. Like, we're not saying they're stupid. We're not saying that they don't know any better. They just essentially they're ignorant. They're ignorant because they don't have these resources at their disposal like we do now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, this is a time period where people felt like they could just like make forgeries, right? And like you could like not really. It was super hard to disprove a forgery because you didn't have like what we have now, right? To kind of help you do that. And so I'm not saying that these are ideas from forgeries. I'm just saying that's kind of like the time frame these people are living in. Is they don't have the all this context that we have now to say, well, this like pseudo Augustine scroll actually wasn't by him. This was by someone who like hated him and was trying to get him like, what I mean? And that's just a crazy example. I don't think that's the truth, but there's stuff out there like that.
No,
So,
no,
but
you
yeah,
make a valid point, because would they have even cared? Like, we have this like weird version of scholarship where it's like we have like textual criticism and like whether or not these sources are valid or not. Whereas back then it's like, well, I had this scroll that was handed down. Do they really care that they were like 100% perfect? Like, I personally don't know. I haven't looked into that, but I mean, Did they care if there were forgeries? Did they even care to know if there were forgeries? I mean, I don't know. Honestly, I
I mean,
don't.
I think you have some people like chasing down forgeries. I actually do think there was somewhat of a system trying to be set up, but yeah. So but the whole thing is, even if they are using Spellgate and what you're saying is accurate, it's they're reading into the text all these things because it's just baked into the cake, right? It's just, hey, this is how it is. And so the issue is for anyone responding, trying to do an apologetics for the incarnation, you have to address divine simplicity, and you have to tell me why, as Aquinas rightly says, only in our way of thinking can we separate these things in God, but they're actually not separate in Him. And then turn around and say, but because we can separate them in our brains, then we can actually talk about them as if they're different things in God, right? Again, that's a paradox. That is a logical contradiction, right? So to say His person is His essence, and then in His nature, and then turn around and say, but they're actually not exactly the same, even though God can't be split into smaller parts, right? That is a contradiction. And so you can't say there's no contradiction in the incarnation if you're also saying that the person of the word is united to a second nature and can communicate with it. And so in my idea, any communication between the word and the human nature would denote a change. If he can like say, okay, now I'm feeling happy, right? Even if you take the idea of he's playing a video game, he's interacting, right? He's like, okay, we're going to do this now. We're going to do this now. Anything like that would denote a change in the divine nature, which would destroy simplicity, which would destroy perfect God theology, which basically destroys all of classical theism, right? But my whole thing is people now are pushing back against these things, right? You have people who reject divine simplicity. They reject impassibility, timelessness, all these things, and they're saying there's good reasons to do this. Well, there was somebody in the 1800s who started rejecting all these things because he said that God and Christ appeared to him and said that they would restore the gospel through him. You know what I mean? And so, he was laughed at, and then all of a sudden, 150 years later, it's like, hey guys, maybe we should like reject timelessness and reject simplicity and do all these things. And he had already done that, right? So, okay, real quick, we can kind of end towards this, but let's pull this up. And this is my comment over here. I just want to kind of go through it. So this is my response, right? So, TLDR, divine person equals divine nature. Changes to the divine person, God the Son, equals changes to the divine nature. Changes the divine nature, destroys classical theism, right? So the contradiction that arises with the incarnation is holding the belief with the idea of divine simplicity. Creedal Christian apologists never mention divine simplicity when talking about the incarnation, because that's when the contradiction is really pronounced, right?
Muslims say it, Unitarians say it, biblical critics say it. Jesus never claimed to be God. But in Matthew 23:34.
So yeah. So basically that was what I was going to share right there, the TLDR of that, right? It's when we talk about divine simplicity that these things show up. And if you're talking about the incarnation and you're not going to talk about divine simplicity, then you're maybe not in the know of divine simplicity, or you might be trying to say, hey, kind of like Aquinas, hey, this is an issue, but we're going to say it's not an issue, and we're going to act like we can, break God down into smaller parts because we have to do that in order to save face. Because there's no other way to kind of get around what he was kind of doing there, in my opinion. Is, hey, these things are the same; they're exactly the same. They don't differ, and then we only break them apart in our thinking, and then later on, well, we can actually break them apart in our thinking, so we can actually do something to one and not the other, but yet in God they're the same thing. So it's to me it just doesn't make any sense. But okay, do y'all have any last things to say? Daniel, you want to wrap us up with any words of wisdom?
No, that was good. I thought you did a good job. The biggest thing I'm most interested in, and Sam summed it up really well for me earlier in the video, is I would love to see like a better timeline, and maybe we could do a cool video showing a timeline of like, okay, this is when Aristotle presents some of these ideas. This is when Plato presents some of these ideas. This is when the church fathers start potentially alluding to some of those ideas, potentially causing some signs of influence. This is when it's formalized in an actual council. This is when the second idea we're talking about is formalized in another council 50 to 100 years later. And then you can kind of see a progression of, okay, we can chart it out. We think this is when it stems from. Now, whether or not that means it's true or false doesn't really matter. It's more to just give a better understanding of where these ideas start to stem from. There's nothing wrong with getting influenced by something else. What matters is if that influence is true or not. And that's the whole point. I don't think the biblical texts were ever meant to be read with a Greek lens. And that's kind of how you get led into a pattern of, take, Thomas Aquinas. This is for all intents and purposes a genius, incredibly smart guy, especially for his time. And he's having to basically sidestep some of the problems that come up when these doctrines are formulated within these specific councils. So you kind of see this pattern of when it happened, and you start to see that they have to kind of sidestep in order for, 90% of the stuff makes sense. This 10% is faulty, but that 10% is part of the foundation, and then part of the house starts to fall apart. So you have to sidestep and avoid that section of the house and not build off of it too much. Otherwise, that section can destroy everything else next to it, because you're making these creeds your foundational piece to your faith. So that's why it's hard to have a fruitful conversation, because for them, if this is not correct, it means that Christianity is false, right? They're not even considering another alternative. It's nothing else out there begins to make sense. But for us as Latter-day Saints, we say, no, our faith is the one that makes the most sense. It's the true faith, and you can come to know by yourself, through yourself, by seeking that revelation through God, as we believe has been the historical precedent since we've seen within the biblical text. So that's what I'll end on.
Okay. So we didn't actually read this one part, and you just quoted it, and I'm going to read it now, because you know who basically agrees with you? Aquinas. He literally says this. This is the right one. Okay, he says, therefore, whatever adheres to a person is united to it in person, whether it belongs to the nature or not. Thence, if the human nature is not united to God, the Word in person, it is nowise united to him, and thus belief in incarnation is altogether done away with, and Christian faith wholly overturned. Therefore, inasmuch as the Word has a human nature united to him, which does not belong to his divine nature, it follows that the union took place in the person of the Word and not in the nature. So he says the same thing, right? He says, look, if it doesn't happen in the person, right, and there's nothing united to him, then the belief in the incarnation is altogether done away with. I would also add, if it happens in the nature, and there would be a change, right, then that would also cause that whole idea to be done away with. So, yeah, I mean, again, something I've said before is, if your whole, I mean, the incarnation is all of Christianity, right? Like it is, this is Christianity, it's God came down and saved us, right? And so we as Latter-day Saints, we don't need the hypostatic union. We don't need a mystery that's self-contradictory in order to understand this, right? We believe that, as we, being pre-existent, could come down and be put into bodies, Christ being God could also do that, right? There's no contradiction there, right? Christians believe, right? And my whole thing is, if your whole faith is built on this idea of a hypostatic union that actually, with simplicity, is contradictory and is something that they can't explain how the union works, right? It doesn't really, there's no real, it's a mystery, right? If your whole faith is dependent on a mystery that's not defined in Scripture, because you're accepting beliefs that also aren't defined in Scripture, maybe there's something wrong with the way you're viewing Christianity, right? And the assumptions and these core beliefs that you think are part of it. And yeah, you know what I mean? It's just, for me, we shouldn't beholding to mysteries that aren't defined in Scripture, and the hypostatic union does not hold up to that. Because again, Christ was tempted in all respects, right? Except for he didn't sin. And what is not denoted, or what is not meant by that, right? Let's pull it up again. It is not, right? This idea of presex to doubt, right? This is not what with the hypostatic union. This is not what incarnation is, right? But again, he's saying, well, it's like someone playing a video game. That's what testify is saying, right? And I think, you know, the Scripture doesn't allow for that. There's very, very, you know, specific terms. And for me, if that was true, that would destroy, you know, my understanding of what Christ did for me. If it's just, oh, he's basically, you know, playing a video game, right? No, for me, Christ came down and he felt everything he went through for us, right? He suffered that. He you know, he went through the wine press alone. Blood came from every pore. He was nailed on the cross. He felt everything, right? And he can tell you that. So yeah. So that's how I want to end it. Any last words from y'all before we come to a close? Nope.
No,
Okay.
it's beautiful.
Well, yeah. So don't forget to go to Through the Mist. Can you give us a real quick rundown, Sam, of what you do there?
Yeah, so Through the Mist, we have, it's not really apologetics, but we have interfaith dialogue between Christians and members of the LDS faith tradition. I've done a little bit of that, and then also now I'm starting to break down some of these ideas that are either tropes from Christians online that aren't supported by our scriptures or our prophets. And then also just kind of like fun conversations about some of these theological ideas. So I like doing collaboration with people like Read It Bum. So it's great.
Yeah. Well, thanks for always coming on, because yeah, it's a lot better than me just sitting here chatting for an hour and a half, just myself. But yeah, so yeah, thank you, Sam. Thank you, Daniel. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Don't forget to go and subscribe to Through the Mist with Sam, and y'all have a good one.